What does it look like when the strongest navy on Earth reaches the mouth of a narrow sea lane and discovers that power alone is no longer the deciding factor? Before sunrise in the Strait of Hormuz, the water can look almost harmless, a sheet of dark metal between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, the air heavy with salt, diesel, and heat that has not yet burned off from the night. Tankers move through the traffic lanes like floating cities, crews awake but quiet, engines humming below steel decks, everyone aware that this is one of the most important arteries in the global economy. And yet, the real danger in Hormuz is often the thing nobody can see. What happens when that invisible danger appears is not a battle in the way most people imagine. It is slower, stranger, and far more unsettling. Because the closer the US Navy comes to reopening the strait, the easier it can become to trap it there. Hormuz is not just another body of water on a map. At its narrowest point, the strait is only 29 nautical miles wide, and the actual navigable channels for ships are just 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. That means the modern world's energy lifeline is funneled through a corridor so tight that precision matters, timing matters, and hesitation matters. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil a day move through these waters, along with a massive share of global LNG trade, and there are only limited alternatives if that flow is interrupted. The geography is brutal in its simplicity. It compresses global commerce, military planning, and political risk into a narrow strip of water where there is almost no room for error. That is why the real challenger in Hormuz is not a carrier, not a destroyer, and not even a missile battery on the coast. It is the mine. Cheap by comparison, quiet by design, and perfectly suited to narrow water, the naval mine is a weapon built not to dominate a fleet head-on, but to force that fleet into a terrible sequence of choices. A mine does not need to sink every ship. It only needs to create enough fear, enough delay, enough uncertainty that traffic slows, insurers panic, commodity prices jump, and the Navy sent to restore order has to begin operating at the speed of caution rather than the speed of power. That is the contradiction at the heart of Hormuz. The more valuable the waterway becomes, the more leverage a relatively simple underwater threat can exert over even the most advanced force on Earth. For decades, US planners understood this because history in the Gulf had already delivered the warning. In April 1988, the frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a deliberately laid Iranian mine in the Arabian Gulf. The explosion was catastrophic enough to break the ship's keel, start severe fires, and flood critical spaces, and by every cold mathematical model, the ship should have been lost. It survived only because the crew had the training, discipline, and initiative to keep it alive. The lesson was not merely that mines are dangerous. It was that a single underwater device, placed in the right environment, could inflict strategic consequences wildly disproportionate to its cost. In Hormuz, that old lesson never really went away. It only became more relevant as shipping density increased and as Iran refined an approach built around asymmetry rather than direct naval parity. And this is where the atmosphere begins to change. In the public imagination, a naval showdown is fast and loud. Missiles, jets, radar screens full of motion, commanders making split-second decisions. Mine warfare is almost the opposite. It begins with silence, with absence, with suspicion. A captain hears that a route may be contaminated. A sonar operator studies a shape on a screen that could be debris, or could be a moored charge, or could be something far worse resting on the seabed below the traffic lane. The bridge crew does not feel adrenaline first. It feels hesitation. Because once the possibility of mines enters the equation, the entire logic of the battle space changes, and everyone in that corridor, from warship crews to tanker masters to traders half a world away, begins waiting for the same answer to a question that cannot be rushed. Is the channel actually safe? Iran's strategy has long exploited that psychological reality. Analysts and congressional reporting have noted that Tehran's mine inventory has been estimated in the thousands, and that even a relatively limited mining effort could force the United States and its partners into an extremely difficult clearing operation. The point is not necessarily to create a permanent blockade. Even serious studies arguing against the idea of a total Iranian shutdown make a more uncomfortable point. The United States could still be drawn into a long, dangerous, escalatory campaign just to restore enough confidence for commerce to resume. That distinction matters. You do not have to close Hormuz forever to win a strategic effect. You only have to make reopening it slow, costly, and politically combustible. That is the provocation, and it is almost elegant in its cruelty. A carrier strike group is built to project force across oceans. A destroyer is designed to defend against missiles, submarines, and aircraft. But neither ship changes the basic mathematics of a minefield in a narrow channel. The fleet can arrive with overwhelming firepower and still find itself forced into a posture that feels strangely defensive. It must slow down. It must verify. It must hold ground that cannot be held comfortably, because the act of clearing a route means lingering inside the very kill zone that an enemy has prepared. Suddenly, the most powerful navy in the world is not advancing on its preferred terms. It is hovering, screening, listening, waiting, and exposing itself to shore-based missiles, drones, fast attack craft, and the political pressure of every hour the strait remains uncertain. Then the sequence begins. In the first seconds after a suspected mine contact appears, nobody on the U.S. ship is thinking about cinematic victory. They are thinking about geometry. Where is the contact relative to the lane? How many more might be nearby? Is the ship already too close? By the 10th second, the operations team is mapping possibilities, because one object can mean a pattern. By the 30th second, the calmest minds in the room understand the true danger. The mine is not just a hazard in the water. It is bait that can force the entire force package into predictable behavior. Screening ships widen their awareness. Air crews search the coast. Commanders begin imagining not one threat, but layers of them stacked deliberately around a narrow transit route. What follows is less like an attack and more like surgery under fire. Unmanned systems go first when they can. Sonar searches are conducted, anomalies are classified. Divers or remotely operated systems may have to investigate. If a mine is confirmed, it is neutralized, one at a time. Every step is methodical, and methodical means slow. Slow means exposed. Exposed means that the minefield is doing exactly what it was designed to do, forcing a navy built for mobility to become temporarily fixed in space and time. That is the trap. Not that the U.S. Navy cannot fight, but that Hormuz can force it to fight while standing still. And while that is happening, the rest of the threat picture begins to close in. In older wars, clearing mines was already dangerous. In a modern Gulf scenario, it can become something worse, because mine countermeasure assets are vulnerable not only to the unseen object below them, but to everything around them. Congressional analysis warned years ago that mine clearing could be made far more difficult if U.S. and coalition forces had to deal simultaneously with speedboats, mini-submarines, and shore-based cruise missiles. Strategic studies reach the same conclusion from another direction. Before clearing can proceed safely, the United States may feel compelled to hunt and suppress coastal missile batteries, radars, and other Iranian firing points. That can add days, weeks, or longer. A mission that starts as route clearance begins mutating into a broader air and naval campaign. This is why the phrase mine clearance mission sounds deceptively neat. The words imply a contained task. The reality is a chain reaction. In April 2026, CENTCOM announced that U.S. forces had begun setting conditions for clearing mines in the Strait of Hormuz, with destroyers transiting the strait and additional underwater drones expected to join the effort. Admin. Brad Cooper described it as the beginning of establishing a new passage that could be shared with maritime industry to encourage the free flow of commerce. Even in that official language, the deeper truth is visible. Before commerce can flow again, someone has to create confidence. Before confidence exists, someone has to physically prove the water is clean. And before that proof can be established, warships must deliberately enter an environment designed to punish deliberate movement. There is another detail here that makes the paradox even sharper. For years, some of the most important ships in this mission were not sleek gray icons of naval prestige, but aging Avenger-class mine countermeasures, ships purpose-built vessels with fiberglass-sheathed wooden hulls, designed specifically to find, classify, and destroy mines. In 2025, the U.S. Navy decommissioned the Bahrain-based Avenger force that had spent decades supporting this mission, while shifting toward littoral combat ships equipped with mine countermeasures, packages, and unmanned systems. The technology is moving forward, but the transition itself reveals something profound. In one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth, the United States still depends on specialized, relatively fragile platforms and painstaking underwater work to solve the problem that high-end combatants alone cannot solve. A carrier can deter, a destroyer can shield, but neither one can simply declare a minefield gone. That is the teaching moment hidden inside the whole scenario. Hormuz is not really a story about weakness in the conventional sense. It is a story about systems. The mine wins leverage because it attacks the process, not the platform. It does not need to beat American naval power outright. It only needs to disrupt the sequence by which that power restores order. Once that happens, the United States must respond with patience, discipline, and coordination rather than spectacle. It must combine destroyers, unmanned systems, helicopters, explosive ordnance teams, intelligence collection, coastal suppression, and allied cooperation. The trap exists because mine warfare drags every glamorous part of modern sea power back down to fundamentals: detection, clearance, escort, and time. Those fundamentals are so unforgiving that even optimistic estimates have always been sobering. Reporting cited by the Congressional Research Service noted one analysis suggesting it could take 28 to 40 days to adequately clear minefields in a serious scenario, and 37 to 112 days overall to reopen the strait, depending on the wider military picture. That does not mean Hormuz would be shut forever. It means the path back to normality could be measured not in dramatic salvos, but in exhausting days of repetitive danger. Every mine neutralized becomes a tiny local success inside a strategic clock that is still ticking for oil markets, insurers, allied governments, and regional commanders. And yet the US Navy has never treated this as a solitary task. That too is part of the answer. Exercises like IMX have brought together more than 30 nations and international organizations across the Arabian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, Red Sea, and beyond, with mine countermeasures remaining a central mission set. The reason is obvious to anyone who studies Hormuz closely. A mine threat in that corridor is not merely an American military problem. It is an international maritime problem, an energy problem, an insurance problem, and a political problem. When Vice Admin Jim Malloy described IMX as a demonstration of global commitment to freedom of navigation and the free flow of commerce, he was describing more than diplomacy. He was describing the only realistic response to a choke point where the cost of uncertainty radiates far beyond the ships physically present. So, the long-term impact of mine warfare in Hormuz is not just found in the ships that survive or the routes that reopen. It lives in doctrine, procurement, exercises, and the uncomfortable humility that the environment imposes on great powers. The 1988 strike on Samuel B. Roberts did not become famous merely because a ship was damaged. It endured because it proved that the Gulf punishes complacency and rewards preparation. The decades of Bahrain-based mine ships mattered for the same reason. Their crews were never the glamorous face of sea power, but they existed because policymakers understood that if Hormuz ever tightened, it would not be prestige platforms carrying the first burden alone. It would be the patient specialists, the screeners around them, and the commanders willing to protect a slow mission in a fast threat environment. That is why this story still feels strangely unresolved, even now. Technology is improving. Unmanned systems are expanding the standoff distance. New platforms are replacing old ones. But the underlying geometry has not changed. Hormuz remains narrow. Commerce remains concentrated. Alternative routes remain limited. And the mine remains one of the most efficient ways in modern warfare to convert geography into political pressure. The world may look at the Strait of Hormuz and see a transit lane. Strategists look at it and see a machine for amplifying friction. The lesson, then, is clear. In war, strength is not only about how much firepower a nation can bring to a place. It is also about how well that nation can keep systems functioning under pressure when an adversary targets the seams rather than the center. Minesweeping in Hormuz is frightening not because it suggests the US Navy is powerless, but because it reveals the price of restoring order in a battlespace designed to punish patience. One side brings fleets, aircraft, sensors, and missiles. The other side places doubt in the water and waits for that doubt to slow everything down. In that contest, the winner is not the side that looks strongest on paper. It is the side that best understands how time, fear, geography, and logistics interact. And maybe that is the final image worth holding on to. Not a missile launch, not a carrier silhouette at sunset, but a narrow gray channel at dawn, a drone skimming low over the water, a destroyer holding station farther back than it wants to, and somewhere beneath the surface, a single object forcing empires to move carefully. That is the true mystery of Hormuz. The smallest weapon in the fight can decide the pace of the largest response, and once you understand that, the strait stops looking like open water. It starts looking like a strategic clock, one that begins ticking the moment the first mine is suspected and does not stop until confidence returns. But Hormuz is not the only place where cheap systems can force great powers into costly choreography. In the next contest, it may not be mines that slow a fleet first. It may be drones,